What if your entire life, your fate, your bloodline, even your soul was considered nothing more than a political bargaining chip? Imagine being born into unimaginable wealth and power, only to discover that your own family would sacrifice your happiness, your body, and your very humanity to keep that power intact. The stone walls of medieval castles hold secrets so dark, so twisted, that they challenge everything we think we know about royal fairy tales. Today, we're uncovering the heartbreaking, unbelievable, and sometimes truly unsettling story of Princess Lucrezia Borgia, a woman whose name became synonymous with scandal, poison, and forbidden love. But the real story is far more tragic than any legend. This is the dark side of Renaissance nobility, where siblings were pawns, marriages were weapons, and the pursuit of power twisted family bonds into something monstrous. By the time we reach the end of her story, you'll understand why her tale has haunted historians for over 500 years. In 1480, the Italian Renaissance was at its height. Art, culture, and learning flourished. But beneath the marble facades of palaces, noble families waged brutal wars for control of city-states, papal territories, and trade routes. The Borgia family, originally from Spain, had clawed their way to the very pinnacle of power when Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI in 1492. In this world, children weren't just heirs. They were living treaties, human contracts sealed with marriage vows and consummated in blood. Early life and first betrayal. Born in 1480, Lucrezia Borgia entered the world as both a blessing and a curse. Her father, Rodrigo Borgia, would later become one of the most controversial popes in history. Her brother, Cesare Borgia, would inspire Machiavelli's The Prince. But for Lucrezia, being born into this family of schemers and murderers meant that her body, her womb, and her very existence belonged not to her, but to their political ambitions. At just 11 years old, still a child who should have been playing with dolls, Lucrezia was betrothed to Giovanni Sforza, a man nearly twice her age. The marriage was purely political. The Borgias needed an alliance with the powerful Sforza family of Milan. But what makes this arrangement particularly chilling is that historical documents suggest Lucrezia's own family members were present during the inspection of her physical development to ensure she could bear children. Even in an age where child marriage was common, the clinical coldness of this evaluation shocked contemporary observers. The annulment and darker suspicions. By 1497, political winds had changed. The Sforza alliance was no longer useful, and Rodrigo Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI, needed to dissolve his daughter's marriage. But divorce was impossible for a papal family. It would create a scandal that could topple the papacy itself. Instead, they pursued annulment on the grounds that the marriage was never consummated, claiming Lucrezia was still a virgin. Giovanni Sforza knew this was a lie. In a fit of rage and desperation, he made an accusation that would follow Lucrezia for the rest of her life. He claimed that Pope Alexander VI wanted his daughter back so he could use her for himself. The implications were horrifying. Sforza suggested that the Pope was engaged in an incestuous relationship with his own daughter, and that he wanted to dissolve her marriage to continue this abuse. But the darkest accusation was yet to come. Sforza also claimed that Lucrezia was involved in an incestuous relationship with her brother Cesare. According to multiple historical accounts, including those of contemporary diplomats and church officials, Cesare Borgia was obsessively possessive of his sister. He reportedly flew into violent rages when she showed affection to her husbands, and several witnesses claimed they had seen inappropriate intimate behavior between the siblings. The mysterious pregnancy. In 1498, shortly after her annulment, Lucrezia disappeared from public view for several months. When she re-emerged, she was caring for an infant boy named Giovanni, called the Infans Romanus, the Roman child. The boy's parentage was one of the most scandalous mysteries of the Renaissance. Pope Alexander VI issued 2 contradictory papal bulls about the child's paternity. The first claimed the boy was Cesare's illegitimate son with an unnamed woman. The second, issued secretly, claimed the boy was actually the Pope's own son. But whispers throughout Rome suggested a third, more disturbing possibility: that the child was the product of the alleged incestuous relationship between Lucrezia and either her father or her brother. What makes this even more chilling is that Lucrezia, barely 18 years old, was forced to publicly care for this child whose very existence was a constant reminder of the abuse she may have suffered. Historical accounts describe her as being unusually attached to the boy, often seen holding him with what observers described as desperate tenderness. The brother's obsession. Cesare Borgia's behavior toward his sister went far beyond normal sibling protectiveness. Contemporary accounts describe him as becoming violently jealous of Lucrezia's romantic relationships. When she married her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, in 1498, Cesare's jealousy reached murderous proportions. Alfonso was young, handsome, and by all accounts, genuinely loved Lucrezia. For perhaps the first time in her life, she experienced what might have been real affection and normal intimacy. But Cesare couldn't tolerate this. In 1500, Alfonso was attacked by unknown assailants while leaving Saint Peter's Basilica. Though he survived the initial assault, he was recovering in the papal palace when Cesare allegedly strangled him with his own hands. Lucrezia was present in the palace that night. Historical accounts describe her discovering Alfonso's body, and her screams of anguish were heard throughout the papal apartments. She was 19 years old, pregnant with Alfonso's child, and had just watched her brother murder her husband, possibly because that husband had freed her from Cesare's obsessive control. The final marriage and lingering shadows. In 1501, Lucrezia was married for the third time, to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara. This marriage was again political. The Borgias needed allies, and Lucrezia's body was once again the currency of negotiation. But this time, something different happened. Distance from Rome and her family seemed to free Lucrezia from the worst of her circumstances. However, even in Ferrara, she couldn't escape the shadow of her past. Her new husband's family was initially horrified by her reputation. They had heard the rumors about incest, poison, and murder. Alfonso d'Este's sister, Isabella, wrote in letters that she was disgusted by the idea of welcoming such a corrupted woman into their noble family. Yet gradually, those who actually knew Lucrezia began to see her differently. Away from her father and brother's influence, she proved to be intelligent, cultured, and surprisingly kind. She became a patron of the arts, supporting poets and painters. She showed genuine maternal affection for her children. But those who knew her well noted that she would sometimes fall into periods of deep melancholy, staring into the distance with what one observer described as the look of someone who has seen too much darkness. The tragic legacy. Lucrezia Borgia died in 1519 at the age of 39, shortly after giving birth to her 8th child. Her final words, according to those present, were prayers for forgiveness, though for what sins she never specified. Some historians suggest she was seeking forgiveness for acts that were forced upon her rather than chosen by her. What makes Lucrezia's story particularly heartbreaking is that she was simultaneously one of the most powerful women in Renaissance Europe and one of the most powerless. She had wealth, title, and political influence, but she never had control over her own body or her own choices. Every marriage, every pregnancy, every relationship was dictated by the political needs of men who saw her as property. The allegations of incest followed her throughout her life and beyond her death. While modern historians debate the truth of these accusations, what's undeniable is that Lucrezia lived in a family where such abuse was considered possible, even probable, by contemporary observers. Whether or not the physical acts occurred, she lived under the constant threat and suspicion of such abuse. From the marble halls of the Vatican to the canals of Ferrara, from the heights of papal power to the depths of family betrayal, Lucrezia Borgia's story reminds us that throughout history, women's bodies have been battlefields where men fought their wars of ambition. Her life reveals how the pursuit of power can corrupt even the most sacred bonds of family, turning fathers into predators, brothers into obsessive controllers, and daughters into unwilling pawns. The princess who was forced to marry her brother, or perhaps forced into something even worse, challenges our fairy tale notions of medieval nobility. Behind the tapestries and beneath the crowns, real women suffered real abuse, their voices silenced by the very power that should have protected them. Lucrezia's story is one of survival, resilience, and the terrible price of being born female in a world where women were currency, not people.